Card number 7 is Harry Cheedy from the Chicago Cubs. And anytime you see a Harry Cheedy card, you have to say that on April 25th, 1962, before he played a game for the Indians, Cheedy was acquired by the expansion New York Mets for a player to be named later. However, he was sent back to the Indians on June 15th, 1962, after 15 games and a 195 batting average, and Cheedy was the player to be named later. He became the first Major League Baseball player to be traded for himself, and it's one of the things he's most known for. But hey, not such a bad thing to be included in the 1953 Bowman Color set, despite that little piece of trivia. This is Card Room Live. This is session number 167, and this is not a show. It is a hangout for fellow vintage collectors, whether we have guests or not. Most of the time, we are wasting time looking at and talking about old cardboard, and through it all, we attempt to make it time well wasted, which is what we've been up to now for nearly 5 years. If you're here with us live, welcome to you. Welcome to all of my fellow YouTubers, to the commenters, to the collectors and folks from all over social media land. If you're new to Card Room Live, don't be afraid to say hello. Many others have been in your shoes before, and they've said hello, and they've discovered that they are among cardboard friends. This is the live stream where everybody knows your name. And sure, we don't know your name yet, but we will learn it soon enough. If you're listening to this later, perhaps you are at work or going to or coming home from work. Perhaps you're sorting cards, looking at eBay or auction sites, rolling out those meatballs, walking the dog, sitting on the job, putting the kids to bed, battling raccoons in the backyard, wondering if Eddie Wakis will come up in conversation. It's very likely at this point. Wondering what other kind of Mike Foolery we're going to get into tonight. Whatever you might be doing, I do hope you get something out of the next hour. If you want to get in touch or have ideas for future sessions for Card Room Live, you can always email me at bowman53channel@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, bowman53_Alex. And on X, 1953 Bowman Color, and sure, why not, on Blue Sky, Bowman 53. And of course, all that information can be found in the description below. This session of Card Room Live is brought to you by Yoo-Hoo. Yes, our friends at Yoo-Hoo, and particularly Yogi Berra, says that you can keep your action going with Yoo-Hoo chocolate-flavored energy drink. I never really realized that Yoo-Hoo was considered an energy drink. It's a delicious chocolate refresher with a high-protein energy boost. It's great for breakfast, great for lunch, great for between meals, maybe even during a live stream. Yoo-Hoo is America's #1 chocolate soft drink. It's even better than Ovaltine. And you know what Yogi says, a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. That has nothing to do with anything. I just threw that in there. So happy Sunday to everybody. Easter is right around the corner. Good evening to all of you. Let's see who's at the bar. Jacob is first tonight. Good evening to you, Jacob. Eddie's Cardboard Chaos is not far behind. Mike, the sports history collector, is taking a break from Mike Foolery tonight. Shout out to him. The Dog Ate My Card is here. Mike Polina is here. Peter B is here. The Spartan Card Collector says, thank God baseball is back. The Phillies are underachieving already. I can't wait for the rest of the season. Ranger Studios is here with the wrench. Sports Guru Melissa is here. Sven Patrick is here. Clean Cheap Shots Drew is here. Jayhawker Vintage Cards is here. The White Sox Fan Card Collector with his White Sox fandom is here. Orlando, A Collector's Dream is here. Kurt, who is in Brooklyn, is here. Dan, Vintage Baseball PC is here. And yes, it was definitely ripping off Cheers, Dan, so I'm glad that that's coming through. Maxa Jackson is here. Larry is here. Confluence Sports Cards is here. Carlisle, the Battery, is here. Joining from Scotland. Wow, interesting. Very cool. Rick Acosta, Dodger Card Collector, is here. Doing your hard work in the back. Okay, we'll try to yell for Rick. Killaboo 3 Kurt is here. Peacemaker Cards. The Vintage Hot Stove is here. And Adam's Card Closet. TJ is online. Mr. Mookie Chilson with a bit of trivia. And this will not be the only bit of Mookie trivia tonight. Chidi never played another Major League Baseball game after being traded for himself. He was puzzled by the tribe accepting him back and noted Cleveland got enough money out of the deal to build a new scoreboard. Very interesting. Think Blue 77 is here. 3D 80s Kid is here. That's right. Strongsville is upon us. And we're good. Well, I'm excited tonight. We've got two guests waiting to come in and share some books and some cards and some stories. Tonight we're going to be talking about baseball books, books that are related to the game that may or may not be inspiring to some of us in terms of how we collect. I know baseball books really have a huge impact on how I collect. And before I bring our two guests in here, something kind of fun that I decided to do was I've got two books that I pulled aside that I'm going to give away. These are going to be two books that I give away tonight as a part of the live stream. I'm going to do one at the beginning of the live stream, and then I'll do the other one at the end. And so that's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Bookended, if you will. I had to do it. So the first book is Pre-War. And it's called Christy Mathewson, The Christian Gentleman, How One Man's Faith and Fastball Forever Changed Baseball. This is by Bob Gaines. Nearly a century after his final Major League appearance, Christy Mathewson is still considered to be one of the world's greatest right-hand pitchers in the history of baseball. The book chronicles the extraordinary life and soul of a gifted man living in a unique time. If you're curious about this book and want to quickly look up a little bit more about it, you can certainly do that. But I'm about to give this book away. But to give it away, you've got to answer a trivia question. And the trivia questions tonight were cooked up by none other than Mr. Mook himself, Mookie Chilson. I asked him to help me out with this. He cobbled together some fantastic trivia questions. So here's the trivia question. To get this book, if you don't want this book, guys, don't participate. Please don't add another book to your bookshelf if you don't want it. Okay, only if you want this book. So here's the question: Christy Mathewson was bananas about girlfriend Jane Stoughton, I should say, when they were married in the winter of 1902. After exchanging vows, the newlyweds spent their honeymoon in this wonderful American city. Where did they spend their honeymoon? Whoever answers first will get the book. And we'll wait all night. But while we're waiting for the answer, I'm going to bring in our guests so we can get started here. This guy's not new to Card Room Live. Here he is, Pastor Craig. Craig, how are you tonight?
Hey, I'm doing good. How you guys doing?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Glad to have you, Craig.
I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. We have a first timer here, Joe from Pre-War Dreams. Joe, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, Alex. Thank you, Pastor Craig. Great to see you and the chat and everybody else that's listening and watching.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a winner. Max is correct. Christy spent his honeymoon in Savannah, Georgia, which is also actually where the New York Giants would do their spring training. So fantastic. And so Mookie, being very clever, worked in answers that were somewhat related to me because I'm in Savannah. So Max, I will send this off to you. Congratulations. Let me just write this down real quick to make sure that it's going to Max. So Joe, why don't we start with you?
Okay.
A book that you've got that you want to recommend, and maybe some cards that you've pulled that go along with that book.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had some cards of a lot of the players that are in here, but this is a book that was written by an author named Tyler Kepner, and it was published, I believe, in 2003. The book here is called A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches.
Yes.
And so this book, what's cool about it is you have a lot of different, as far as cards that are making up the K. But what he does really eloquently in here, he interviews over 300 people for this book, 72 of which are Hall of Famers. And what he does is he goes through, and each chapter is about a specific pitch within baseball. And, I'm not going to sit here and go through, 10 chapters or whatever. I'm going to bore everybody. But I picked out a couple of things just about, a couple of the chapters. And one of the things I found the most fascinating was his chapter on the slider. And what's funny is he dates it back to 1911, where Cy Young at the time called the slider a narrower curve. And Chief Bender in 1911 called it a fast curve. But he dates it back to the early 20s, and two pitchers, George Blayholder and George Yulee, who in the early 20s basically threw a slider. And they said basically it was a fastball that you turn loose in a different way. And that's how they described a slider. So when you're kind of going through the chapter, it kind of seems like it was a very mysterious pitch. In 1927, Yulee taught New York Yankee Waite Hoyt as far as the slider. And it just kind of became a pitch that was known, but not a lot of people knew about it. But it wasn't until the early 40s, really, when it became kind of a staple, especially with Bob Feller, who developed a slider during World War II. And what he talked about was it's just an off-center grip, and you put mid-finger pressure. And basically what you do is a late, subtle wrist snap in order to throw the pitch. And what's really cool in the book is it kind of goes forward and talks about how this pitch was kind of evolved. And the big person evolving as far as this pitch in more modern baseball today was Johnny Sain. In 1961, he was the New York Yankee pitching coach. So what he did was he took an actual apple and stabbed the TV antenna through it to basically try to create the spin of a slider. And what he told his pitchers is when you throw it, you just turn and pull. And of the pitchers that he taught this slider to from 1960 to 1972, he had 9 20-game winners in that span. And they kind of fast forward and talk about how in 1972, 73, Sparky Lyle, who was with the Red Sox and came over to the Yankees, taught Ron Guidry how to throw the slider, which was his most devastating pitch during his run. And in the book, it talks about the 3 kind of pitchers that had the most devastating sliders. And they talked about Steve Carlton. Steve Carlton talked about a dot where it was side spin rotation on the ball. And the ball, by doing this and creating this dot, created the tight spin. So hitters couldn't see this dot, but it was a way that they thought it was a fastball. And then at the end, it would just, curve at the end or slide at the end when it got to the plate. Bob Gibson said that was his number 1 pitch. He threw it about 92 miles an hour. He said he took his index and middle fingers and put them together on the ball, and then between the seams at the narrow, and then basically used his thumb on the seam below. And what he said was his effect on his slider, he wanted it to sweep against right-handers. And then with left-handers, he used a stiff wrist so he could throw it down and away or down and into left-handed hitters, which created a lot of elbow problems for him and ended up forcing him to retire. But they said that the best slider that kind of through history that they thought was J.R. Richard from the Astros, who had a very short but very dynamic career. And they talked about how he developed his slider. He never played baseball until he was 15 years old. And he talked about he lived in Ruston, Louisiana, and found a book on the side of the road that was a baseball book about pitching. And basically he picked the book up and taught himself how to throw a slider, and basically threw one of the most devastating sliders in the history of the game just by reading a book, picking up a baseball and figuring out how to throw it.
Right. I have that book, Joe, and it's I've always been a fan of pitchers in particular, and I have like an autographed baseball collection going of pitchers, and that book was great for me to just sort of wrap my head around who are some of the names that stand out. And I like that book because it does break it down by type of pitch, which is really cool, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, they talked a lot in there also about like the splitter and about how that started with Fred Martin, like in the 70s. He was a pitching coach for the Chicago Cubs. His prized pupil basically was Bruce Sutter, who he taught over the course of like 3 minor league seasons. Bruce Sutter actually ended up quitting baseball for a little bit and went back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and cut meat for a time period until he could master the pitch. And what was cool is, and it kind of relates to me being in Detroit. In 1979, Roger Craig was the manager for the San Diego Padres and asked Fred Martin and Bruce Sutter if he could watch his bullpen session. And basically, Roger Craig figured out the mechanics of the split finger pitch. And when he came to the Tigers in 1980 as the pitching coach under Sparky Anderson, he developed it with Milt Wilcox, Jack Morris, and Petrie. And Jack Morris, obviously a Hall of Famer. And Robin Yount said that basically the split finger fastball was so effective because you could never recognize the pitch. Like you never knew what was coming at you, especially with Morris, because Morris did something different. I guess a lot of split finger fastball pitchers throw it on their fingertips. And what Morris did was bury it in the palm of his hand. And so that way, when he threw it, it was even more deceptive because people thought it was a changeup. But instead, it was this, devastating split finger fastball that went in the dirt. But by the time you realized it was going to the dirt, you were already swinging.
Right.
And he talks about how this developed like Mark Davis and Bruce Hurst and Tom Henke and Mike Scott. Mike Scott was flown from the Astros to San Diego to basically spend an offseason with Roger Craig to learn the split finger fastball. And basically the next year in 86, he won the Cy Young. They talked about how Dave Stewart was taught in spring training in 1982 by Sandy Koufax how to throw a split finger fastball, even though Koufax never threw it. And then it was just really fascinating that's cool. I like Sasquatch too. But it was just fascinating how these pitchers, we all think as fans and we all think as collectors that these great players and players that just make the major leagues have it all when they get there.
Right.
And just to be able to see the evolution during their time in the game and just different things that they pick up along the way can either, help a career or destroy a career just by being able to pick up things from other players or watching other players to develop a tool that they need to be as great as they are.
Right. Absolutely. Really great. All right, Craig.
All right. Well, here we go. This will be something that Joe will like, I think. Put it right here. Mr. Al Kaline. And just a fantastic book on him. I saw Al Kaline play a few times as a kid in Milwaukee when he was with the Detroit Tigers. And then when I was on the Air Force, I was in Michigan, so he was the announcer we listened to a lot. And so I just really appreciate Al Kaline's his game, and his life story is really so interesting because he grew up in Maryland, Baltimore, and he said that he barely passed school. He was just barely good enough to get through high school. The teachers passed him because they knew he was going to be a ball player. Man, he was such a good ball player, and he really does regret not like applying more to the academic side. But he was 100% baseball, and his family, they were. I don't want to say they were in poverty, but they were barely above the poverty line. They were on the wrong side of the tracks in Baltimore, and life was a struggle for them. And his family collectively did everything they could to get him into all of the games, every advantage that he could get to play baseball. And it's kind of amazing because a lot of people don't know, but when he was 8 years old, they had to take 2 inches of his bone from his left foot out, which caused deformity for his whole life and really affected, he had to learn how to run again. And especially as he got a little bit older, as age started to catch up with him, and wasn't so nimble anymore, it really was difficult for running as he got older. And but Al Kaline was just a great player. And of course, he is so well known for, being the youngest American League batting champion. That was his calling card, but he also talks in the book that in a way, that was kind of an anchor around him because it was expected at such a young age to be so good. And he was following in the footsteps of Ty Cobb and Hank Greenberg, and he came in with such a splash. And there was very little winning to go on in Detroit at that time. And he was a very good ball player, but he wasn't hitting 340 anymore. And so he really struggled with his identity as a ball player. And even as players like Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and other players got the spotlight, Kaline was considered to be good, but he was always like a step below them. And that kind of did bother him a little bit. But he's got some beautiful, beautiful cards. This is probably one of my favorites. The 56 is just that is a glorious, that is just a beautiful, beautiful card. I love the colors. And to me, that just epitomizes Al Kaline just kind of running, that stride, the artist rendition, it looks like he's running gleefully, happily. And he was such a 5-tool player. He was an outstanding outfielder. And he was so good that he often injured himself by running into the walls and breaking collarbones. And one thing about Kaline, he missed 277 games between 1959 and 68. I mean, that's a lot of games. That's almost 2 years worth that he missed. And broken collarbone, he broke his hand. He broke his arm in 1968 in a fight. I mean, the year they won the World Series, and he got into a fight, but he in 1970 he almost died in Milwaukee. A lot of people don't know that story, but he banged up against the wall, and when he hit the wall, his tongue flipped over in his mouth. And he was literally choking on it. Willie Horton ran out there, and Horton pried open his jaw, like his jaw was clenched. And Horton pried it open, got the tongue flipped over. He ended up staying in the hospital, but he almost died. He almost choked to death. And Kaline was just a great player. And this is another one of my absolute favorite cards. Love that set. Love the 55 doubleheaders. And just look at the detail on that. The guy drinking at the water fountain.
Yeah.
The coach yelling, the crowd in the background. I mean, again, this is one of my favorite pieces of my collection. But, Al, 3,007 hits and 1 home run shy of 400, 399, 18 All-Star games, 10 Golden Gloves, Mr. Tiger, and his career after baseball was as good as his baseball career was. And he's just one of those guys I'm drawn to he's a great player, but kind of a second-tier guy, largely forgotten outside of Detroit, or, people that are really into the Hall of Fame, or even like baseball card guys like us. And, Al Kaline was just a fabulous player and probably a better person than he was a player. And took every advantage he had, which was just amazing. He took advantage of all of the situations. So, and for him to win that World Series in 68 was kind of the capstone of always playing second fiddle, and just a great time for him. So,
what's cool about Kaline too, and I don't know if Pastor Craig knows this. So in 1968, he gets injured, as Pastor Craig talked about. And so when he came back, Mayo Smith was the manager of the Detroit Tigers. And I'm hearing this secondhand because I was 9 years away from even being on this earth. So I was not there. I'm just telling you right now. So when he was coming back, the problem with the Tigers at that time in 68, obviously they had McLean and Lolich, and they had, great pitching. But the problem was they had 4 awesome outfielders. So they had Al Kaline in right. They had Mickey Stanley in center. They had Jim Northrup in left, and Willie Horton was on the bench. And they had this horrible, horrible shortstop named Roy Euler. For anyone who's a Roy Euler fan, I apologize.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you right now. So Kaline was the catalyst, because Kaline knew with McLean and with Lolich, it was his best shot to win the World Series and for him to actually get a World Series title. So he, as basically the captain and the leader of the team, went to Mayo Smith before the World Series because they're getting ready to play St. Louis. And he said, look, we can't basically, I'm sure he did it nicely because he was a nice man, but he was like, we can't basically have Ray Euler be like this basically paper bag at the
Right.
plate and do nothing for us. So Mickey Stanley, who was considered their best athlete, came in and played shortstop for the World Series. The only time in his career he ever played shortstop in his life. So that way they could put Jim Northrup in center field and Willie Horton in left field.
Right.
And a lot of people in Detroit at that time who were fans believed that was actually the difference for them to win the World Series in '68 and beat St. Louis.
Yeah, he talks in the book about Euler being replaced and Stanley and not having taken ground balls at shortstop for so long, and like they're in pregame warmups and they're like, I think I can do it. It was a gutsy move by Mayo Smith, and in this book, Kaline does talk about this guy right here, Eddie Matthews, who was traded to Detroit. And you can see this card's been with me a long time. But that's one of my special cards. But Matthews, they were really critical of Mayo Smith, the team was, and Eddie Matthews came in and kind of laid the law down as the old vet and said, pull your head out of your whatever, rally around this guy. And so Matthews didn't do much of the team, but he told the team, you've got to get around your manager. We can't have this dissension. So
Right.
kind of interesting. So that's my story on Al Kaline. Love him.
Wonderful.
I need the 54. I need the 54 to complete the run. So
yeah. It's always those 54 tops, right?
I know.
I'll share a book, guys. I'm not too far into this book. I only started it like really a couple of weeks ago, but I thought, why not share it? It's called The Era. Maybe I should single out my page here. The Era, 1947 to 1957, when the Yankees, Giants, and Dodgers ruled the world, by Roger Kahn. Of course, Roger Kahn is famous for writing The Boys of Summer and a lot of other great books. But I've had this book for a while. Just finally, having finished The Boys of Summer, I read something else and then decided, you know what, I think it's time to read this book. And just to kind of give you a sense, the back of the book says celebrated sports writer Roger Kahn casts his gaze on the golden age of baseball, an unforgettable time when the game thrived as America's unrivaled national sport. I'm just going to read a little bit of the prologue, which is, I'm a couple chapters into it now, but I'm like kind of fueled by the prologue, so I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I'll just read you the end. It says, things end, dramas, wars, reigns, lives, and loves. I know two reasons why the era remains magnificent in our memories. The first is simple. The era was magnificent. The second is more complex. The era came to a dramatically proper finale. It ended when the time was right. Its end was sad, but suitable. The drama was played out. By the time the ball clubs moved west, the great Dodger team was waning. Pee Wee Reese, the immortal shortstop, had moved to third base. Jackie Robinson was working for a chain of lunch counters. The Giants had fired Leo DeRocher. The Yankee decline took longer, but eventually even the Yankees collapsed. Along that route, someone finally fired Casey Stengel. The era possesses an inevitability and a rightness. It begins with Jackie Robinson arriving and ends with Walter O'Malley departing, hero and brigand who despised each other. As actors say, you have to know when to get off the stage, but it was the most exciting time for baseball. You should have been there. I mean, to take you. And after I read it, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready for this book. It's right up my alley. And so just as a attachment to that, I pulled two cards from each of these teams and somewhat of a random pull. But just to guys, to sort of show you how I collect at this point. Here's a 1952 Bowman Wes Westrom, who was the catcher for the Giants, and who doesn't love a catcher card where the guy's ripping his mask off?
Yep.
Here's a 54 Bowman Willie Mays coming out of the dugout. Here's a card I got recently, 1953 Topps Bobby Morgan.
Love the red on that.
Yeah, just a beautiful card, and a key part of that infield, not a name that a lot of people remember, but he was in there with Reese and Robinson and Hodges. 51 Topps Duke Snider. Here's another card I got fairly recently, 54 Bowman Vic Rashi. He actually got traded this year, so this is his last Yankees card. And of course, I had to pull one more Yankee, so I might as well show this guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, beautiful.
You're such a show off, Alex.
Yeah. Why not, right? Just for fun. All right, Joe, back to you.
Well, I have to give Pastor Craig a little bit of a attaboy here because he kind of set me up completely for my second book. So
nice.
Talking about Al Kaline. So, I'm 48 and I'm born and raised in Detroit. So my childhood was, and with all due respect to Pastor Craig and Al Kaline, my childhood was literally dictated by two voices of baseball. And so we had the great fortune on the color side to have George Kell and Al Kaline be the color commentators for Tiger Baseball. And they were the color commentators literally my entire childhood into adulthood. So George Kell is somebody that's always in my head. But equally and probably even more so in my head when I watch baseball, even now as an adult, is Ernie Harwell.
Yeah.
So Ernie Harwell has a couple of different books, but this is the book that I chose. He has a great book that actually came out kind of in the mid-'80s called Tune to Baseball. And I was able to get an autographed copy from Mr. Harwell. But this book was in 2001, and it's called Stories from My Life in Baseball. It was done by basically the Detroit Free Press, who's the local paper here. But Ernie Harwell, to me, and with all due respect, I know that on a lot of sportscaster and sports announcers in baseball, he's ranked in the top 10. But a lot of times Vin Scully and Red Barber and Mel Allen and Harry Carey and Jack Buck are all kind of above them. And with all due respect to them and their families, I disagree. Ernie Harwell was just somebody that the way that I describe Ernie Harwell to people who never listened to him and who were a baseball fan was basically if you knew nothing about baseball, you could sit and listen to his just very low-key Southern accent. And after listening to one game, you'd be a baseball fan. And how he starts this book, I think, is very telling of how he felt about himself. He was a very humble man. And the first line in this book says, "I'm a failed sports writer." That's how he starts this book. And he talks about when he was a kid growing up, his favorite team were the Atlanta Crackers. He grew up in Georgia. And his hero was Grantland Rice. And for anybody who doesn't know who Grantland Rice was a famous sports writer in the Georgia area who basically, for lack of a better term, was able and granted access to follow Bobby Jones his entire career, winning the 8 majors that he did in golf. And so Ernie Harwell knew that he wasn't going to be a baseball player. So he started sending articles to the Sporting News as a 16-year-old back in 1934. And after he got out of school, he got his first radio job in 1940, but abruptly had to quit because then he went and served 4 years in the Marines during World War II. So when he came back, he got a couple of jobs in radio. His first job being with the New York Giants. And in the book, he talks about how on May 28th, 1951, he was calling Willie Mays' first game as a debut and saw Willie Mays hit a home run off Warren Spahn in his first pitch that he saw in the big leagues. And he talked about how Willie Mays tried to plead with Leo DeRocher not to put him in the lineup because he thought that he wasn't ready. And Leo DeRocher did anyway, and the rest is kind of history. He talks about something that is near and dear, I think, to Alex's heart. He called the game on September 6, 1953 at the Polo Grounds and goes in depth about Carl Furillo, who Leo DeRocher had his pitcher throw at Carl Furillo, who was in basically an MVP-type season. Carl Furillo then jogged down to first base, touched first base, ran directly into the New York Giants dugout and started a fist fight and tried to get at Leo DeRocher. Monty Irvin actually saved Leo DeRocher, and in the process stepped and broke Carl Furillo's hand, which kept him out for 22 games, but he still won the batting title that year. He talked about in this book how the greatest feat besides Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak, and again, I'm gonna side with the host here, is that he thinks the greatest feat in baseball was in 1933 when Philadelphia had a double triple crown with Jimmy Fox and Chuck Klein, both being triple crown winners with the Phillies and the A's. He talked about how in 1961, how he had a lunch date with Wally Pipp, famously the gentleman that was taking Lou Gehrig took his place in the lineup. And he went to lunch with them with their wives. And he actually started playing in 1913 with the Tigers. He was sold to the Yankees in 1915. But in 1922, there was a player who had just come to the Yankees, was in his third year, who criticized Wally Pipp and his defense. And he talked about he had basically a fist fight in the locker room with Babe Ruth, and how he and Babe Ruth got into a fist fight because he criticized his fielding. And basically that the only reason Lou Gehrig started his streak was because Wally Pipp had a headache and couldn't play. And then basically Lou Gehrig took a spot, and the rest is, as they say, is history.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
He also, I thought was really interesting, talked about his favorite player. Now, he was in baseball 53 years. His favorite player, he said, was Kirby Puckett. And he talked about how in his third year in spring training, Puckett was frustrated because he only had hit 2 home runs in the majors. And basically, he didn't know what he was going to do, if he was going to be able to stay up and be able to play with the Twins. And a Hall of Famer by the name of Tony Oliva took him aside in spring training and basically retaught Puckett how to hit with power. And Puckett said that basically without Tony Oliva, he wouldn't have had a career. And then the last thing in here, he talked about something I thought was really cool. He talked about how in baseball, that pitchers, in his opinion, seem to be so undervalued compared to position players. And he talked about that he thought there were only 6 times in his lifetime that a team increased their attendance due to a player. And the 6 players that he named, he said, were Bob Feller, Sandy Koufax, Mark the Bird Fidrich in 1976, and Fernando Valenzuela.
Yeah.
And he said that the 2 hitters that they thought increased attendance for owners were Ralph Kiner in Pittsburgh, and then McGuire and Sosa in 1998 in their home run battle.
Sure.
But he throughout this, I think the thing that I like the most about this book is the fact that this is just a genuine person who loved the game of baseball. And he literally just talked about how his love for the game, he tried to express to fans. And there's like in Detroit, there's all these Ernie-isms, and Kurt kind of brought one up. That saying, he stood there like the house by the side of the road. He always said after a guy basically got called out looking at a third strike. And that actual line is actually from a poem by a poet named Sam Walter Foss, who wrote this in 1897. And he wrote it about a house that literally is on the side of the road while he was attending college in New Hampshire. And the thing that he talks about in this poem is he champions kindness. He talks about empathy for this house. He talks about how this house has a non-judgmental relationship with anything that happens on this road. He talks about how he tries to help all passersby that come by the house, and he accepts anybody that comes onto this road, regardless of their flaws. And those 5 things in this poem, in a lot of ways, describe Ernie Harwell to a T. Like, Ernie Harwell was just, I mean, he passed away on May 3rd, 2010. And on May 6th, which happens to be my birthday, they did a memorial at the park. And I dragged my wife, and at that time, my almost 8-month-old daughter to pay respects to Ernie Harwell at the stadium. And it's something where I think something like 10 or 15,000 fans came to Comerica Park on a random 40-degree, May night, and just showed their respects for a guy who not only probably was part of their childhood, but obviously was the voice that they heard throughout their entire baseball history, which
Right.
I think is a testament to the man, and just how good of a person he was.
Absolutely. And there's something, I don't know if it's happening. I hope it's still happening, but there is something special about Harwell and guys from that era and how much of a strong association people had with them, to the point where like you feel like you know them because you're listening to them in your house for years, right? And there's some huge association with those people. Craig.
Hey, okay. This is a somebody that probably most people haven't heard of before, but it's Ryan Duran, and this guy here was the Ricky Vaughn, the Wild Thing in the movie The Major Leaguer, was charactered after this guy here. And the reason what's so cool about my brother-in-law was a president and chairman of the board at a bank, and he used to go golfing quite a bit with Ryan in Wisconsin. And he was probably one of the most wild pitchers in baseball. And here's his 1963 Topps card. His rookie card's a 58. His last card is a 65. And his career record was 27-44 with 57 saves, 600 strikeouts. He had a blazing fastball. Some people think it was almost up to 100 miles an hour, but he had terrible vision with very thick glasses. And he had rheumatic fever as a child, which gave him that poor vision. His vision was so bad in high school that as a second baseman, he had to throw the ball underhanded to the first baseman and not overthrow him. and literally in this book, he talks about one time he hit the batter in the warm-up circle. People were scared to death to go in the trenches with this guy because he was wild. He would throw his warm-ups. He'd throw him over the catcher. He'd bounce him up there. Casey Stengel said, that you have to be so careful digging in because you might end up getting killed. By him. He was truly a journeyman, but he had a terrible problem with alcoholism. That's really what destroyed his career. And he gave my brother-in-law this card here and autographed it during one of their golfing sessions. And it's just about overcoming alcoholism, overcoming his demon, which was alcohol, which really destroyed his career and a lot of his life. And but he did win the World Series in '58 with the Yankees. He had 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 save in that series, and 14 strikeouts in 9 innings. And he was a 4-time All-Star. He was a journeyman. Orioles, A's, Yankees, Angels, Phillies, Reds, Phillies, Senators. And but the stories in this book are amazing because you've got the stories of a guy that was a journeyman, not a star,
Right.
and just the people he ran into and the experiences he had. A fascinating book. And I collect common players. You've seen my series, the stories behind the cardboard. And this guy, nothing but a common player. If you're a set builder, you're going to have him between 58 and 65. But he's got a fabulous story. And he overcame alcoholism. And I think it's pretty cool. My brother-in-law got to go golfing with him a bunch of times. And it's a neat story. These are the guys that make up baseball. They're as important as the Al Kalines, Don Drysdale's, etc. So I just want to share a guy that was kind of off the beaten track, and I love the stories by those guys. I love it.
Absolutely. Love it. That's great. And I love that series, Craig. I'll share a book that I haven't actually gotten into just yet. I was on vacation, I guess a couple weeks ago now. And for anybody that's driving through Florida, I was in Florida and I stopped in Jacksonville very briefly. And in Jacksonville, there is a bookstore called Chamblin's. There's actually two Chamblin's, and they are the biggest bookstores I've ever been in my life. Like, you can literally get lost in these bookstores. No joke. It's kind of like going to it's like the National of bookstores. Maybe that gives you some context. Maybe not that big, but they're big. And I love stopping in there because it's all used books and there's stuff coming in all the time. And I just picked up a whole bunch of new baseball books. And so this is one that I picked up. I haven't really had a chance to look through it yet, but I'll share it with you guys. It's called When the Game Was Black and White, An Illustrated History of Baseball's Negro Leagues. And this is one of those books where it's certainly got the history built into it, but it's also really photograph heavy. This was something that I was excited about because, when you're doing research on this stuff, there's only so much stuff that you can come across on the internet. As vast as the internet is, you just never know what else is out there. And what I like about some of these earlier publications is that you can come across photographs that you're not necessarily going to easily come across anywhere else. And so, here's a great shot. And so there's going to be
awesome.
characters in this book that are very well known. Kind of looking through here, but there's also going to be plenty of individuals in here that will be new to me, which will be really entertaining to come across. Here's Cool Papa Bell. Here's something you don't see all the time, Satchel Paige. At bat.
That's so cool. That's a cool picture. Yeah, I love the stories behind the different players. It just adds so much to the collection.
Absolutely. And it can really inspire like new ideas.
Right.
And new ways of looking at your collecting habits. Here's Josh Gibson in the locker room.
That's cool.
All kinds of really great stuff. And just sort of in the spirit of that, these are all like mainstream American issues, but these are all players, of course, that started in the Negro League. So here's top Hank Thompson. Of course, got to get a Jackie in there.
There you go.
That's awesome.
55 Bowman, Don Newcomb. And then 51 Topps, Monty Irvin. So just a part of the history of the game that I'm always interested in learning more about. So I'll be excited to get into that book at some point.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, we've got 10 minutes.
All right, this will be quick. So, like I said, I'm from Detroit. So my number one collecting goal, like as a collector, is eventually, and I don't know when this is going to be, but I'd like to eventually get a Ty Cobb Playing Days card. That is something that I just want, whether it's being from Detroit or whatever, but also just because of his story. You did a fantastic, I call it like a mini movie on Ty Cobb.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so I went out and read his book, A Terrible Beauty by Charles, is it Learson?
Yeah.
And I read it cover to cover. And I thought it was a fascinating book. It talked a lot about a lot of the story of Cobb that just a lot of us didn't know about just his childhood and kind of how hard his childhood was. And, the fact that his mom shot his dad and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I digress.
Yeah.
When Cobb got into the major leagues, Cobb was pretty much hated by most of the Tiger team. I believe that was in the middle of the 1905 season when he came up. And in 1906, he was actually sliding into second and was spiked. And unlike previous times where he was provoked and would always like start a fight on the field or whatever the case may be, a certain player kind of told him that he should give a second thought about actually fighting him. And it turned out that that player was this guy, Kid Elberfeld, who was the shortstop for the New York team. And so this is Kid Elberfeld's T206 card. And the reason that I went and bought this card wasn't because Ty Cobb tried to spike him in his second year as a Detroit Tiger, but Kid Elberfeld, the first 3, 4, 5 years of Cobb's career up until about 1908, basically became his mentor. Basically, he saw in Cobb what Cobb thought he knew about himself, because Cobb was a very confident player.
Right.
Some would say cocky, but I would just stick with confident. But Elberfeld helped him in the off season writing letters to him. And they had a correspondence for several years where Elberfeld basically taught him all the stuff off the field. Basically said, hey, listen, you're a great player, but if you don't get along with your teammates, or at least have the notion that you're getting along with your teammates, you're going to be blackballed. And for as much, ability that you have in this game, nobody's going to want to touch you because you can't be a good teammate.
Right.
And Ty Cobb throughout his life and throughout his career really, really kind of stood out and kind of singled out Kid Elberfeld as that guy who was his mentor and basically helped him learn how to play professional baseball, to be a good teammate, to be a good, at least person on the field, so to speak. Obviously, he got into fights and went in the stands and beat people up and whatever, but that's little stuff. But I think that it's players like that, like Pastor Craig was saying, where I think that there are so many players in this game, as collectors, we all try to go out and we all are fascinated by the top 20, the top 30, the top 50 players. And a lot of this hobby is I feel like driven by those players, but it's the other players that were keys to development and growth of a Ty Cobb or a Tony Oliva to a Kirby Puckett or things of that nature, where they don't get recognized as much, and they could have had just as much, if not more of an impact on certain players' lives than anyone else or any other Hall of Famer had on their career. And
right.
I really like stories like that, because not only does it help me learn about certain players, but a lot of times the spotlight isn't on those players. And just to be able to learn about the baseball history, I think is kind of what this hobby is all about.
I totally agree. And I also think that it makes your collection more interesting for you. And it also, I think, makes it more interesting to talk about with other people, because somebody could say, like, how come that Ty Cobb card is sitting next to that player that you just mentioned? Is like, well, let me tell you the story. Right?
Yeah.
If it's just a Cobb card by itself, it's like, okay, that's interesting. But there's more to the hobby, I think. When
at that
characters.
At that point, it just doesn't become a flex.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Hey, so we've got one more book to give away, and then if there's any like last cards or books you guys want to throw up real quick. So the last question for those of you in the chat is for this book. The book is called Praying for Gil Hodges, a memoir of the 55 World Series and one family's love of the Brooklyn Dodgers. So if you're a Gil Hodges fan or just a fan of this time period, here's the question that you have to answer. And again, this is a question courtesy of our friend Mook. In 1949, Hodges made his first All-Star Game appearance, which came to Ebbets Field for the first time that year. Hodges had finished third in balloting, but he got the nod as a backup when the man who finished second was unable to play. Which player was not able to play that year that Hodges filled in for? Who's got the answer? And I'll keep my eye on the chat. But meanwhile, any last cards or books you guys want to throw up? Hey, that's a nice card.
That's a nice looking card. Got to have that up. And Eddie Matthews, my main guy. Great. It's fun to read books about your main guy and to get his story. It's just fantastic. And then my last guy that I did have pulled out was this guy here. I think this is one of the best baseball cards ever.
Yeah.
And Warren Spahn's story is just fantastic. I've got a book by him. I'm sure many people have read it. A great American hero, great pitcher. And man, if you don't have that card in your collection, go buy it. It's a great card. Beautiful card. Had to show up for your show.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Always love seeing that card.
Yeah. Never get tired of it.
Well,
and that's a good one too. So.
Okay, well, let's see that. Yeah, that's a beautiful card too.
That was one of your other sponsors. Every now and then you'll have a little blip on.
That's right.
That's right. Hey, Paul, I didn't know if you're going to be sponsoring that, but that is a yeah. Those are two of the best Warren Spahn cards I think out there. So
totally, and hard to go wrong with Red Heart. Well, hey, Craig, Joe, thank you both for sharing your time, your stories, and your books.
Thank you.
It was amazing.
Thank you.
Always love coming on your show. Always love, not your show, your channel, your hangout. It's not a show.
Yeah, really appreciate the invite, Alex. Thank you.
All right.
See you in Starkville, Joe.
All right. See you, Pastor Craig. Take care, bud.
All right, guys.
Yeah. So, guys, stay tuned for 4 Collectors at 9. And we'll be back next Sunday night. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. The bar is closed.